So I'll firstly introduce Jane. So Jane has a whole host of credentials that would be here all night if we were to go into them. Jane has worked in this space for a long time, working with mental health and supporting women and people in lots of different ways, but has come to specialize in ADHD and in particular women's health and fertility. So this is why I wanted us to have this chat today, so that we could dissect this in more detail, because ADHD isn't something that, or is just something that people are beginning to speak more and more about, gain more awareness about, which is great. But it's rare that we have the conversation of how much it's impacting women, and in particular, how much that can specifically be impacting fertility. So it's such a raw but very needed subject to be explored in more detail. So luckily, Jane is on hand to be able to answer these questions and just shine some light on that really important but quite complex picture, and just help us try and make some sense of it, give us some context, and help us to navigate to some support, and B, to better understanding ourselves, so we start feeling more confident and comfortable with ourselves as well. So what I'm going to be doing is allowing Jane to speak, so I won't be taking up all of this, but we're going to be asking some questions. Jane's going to be answering some questions, and then at the end, if you want to post all of those questions in the chat, then we can go through any of them at the end, because undoubtedly it's such a large subject, there's going to be lots of questions that crop up. We can't give one-to-one personal advice, but we can certainly hopefully give some generic advice and point you in this in the realm of support, should you feel like you want or need some further support down the line, if that's all okay. Okay, grand. So what I'm going to first ask Jane to do, if that's okay, is, because this is obviously your area of speciality and it's something that I'm learning about, don't know a whole lot about myself, so I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say over the next hour. But I want to give some context and foundation to this as well. So ultimately, what defines ADHD and what are we looking at? If we feel like we fall into that category, do we need to push for this diagnosis? Do we need to push for that label? Or can we work on acknowledging that within ourselves and embracing the pros and cons that come with something like that? So I just wanted to ask you to give some context to that bigger picture and that broader diagnosis, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. A really great question. About to start with, really, is thank you first of all for letting me come and talk about this topic, because it is something that I feel really passionate about, and I'm now really starting to have conversations with people in different spheres and areas and contexts, so that we can start to see different areas of life through an ADHD lens, because that's what's so important here, is to start to recognize that ADHD impacts all areas of life. And the stereotypes have kind of got in the way, particularly for women, so that we don't understand how it impacts our lives as easily as, say, maybe, boys in the classroom have traditionally been seen as the ADHDers. So it is helpful to understand a bit more about it for ourselves. I would say it's a really personal choice around the diagnosis, and it depends what is most important to every individual. For some people, they really feel they need that validation of a diagnosis. That was my experience. I needed to understand that a lot of ADHDers feel as though they've kind of made it up in their head, like, I think I'm just imagining this. And the process of the assessment, which is a lengthy assessment, the way that the media sometimes portray it as though you can just go along and get one, like, I don't know, an MOT or certificate or something, it's just ridiculous. It's a really lengthy process that's led by a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So let's just debunk that one. And for some people, going through that process is really helpful to go, okay, I feel validated by this label. It helps me to understand myself and allow myself that space and time to to be curious and understand and maybe get the support you feel that you need, maybe explore medication, because of course without a diagnosis we can't get medication. And medication isn't for everybody. However, there's a lot of evidence that shows how effective medication can be, but not on its own, does need to have an understanding alongside it. But for some individuals, going down that route isn't necessary. And that's why I really feel passionately about starting conversations so that people can, particularly women, can start to become aware of what ADHD is and how differently it can present for us. So that maybe that understanding is enough to then lead to more acceptance of, okay, so why is it that I find it so difficult to keep time to anything? Why is it so difficult that I struggle to get on top of my life admin? You know, I mentioned the MOT there, that's just one of them, many things that an ADHD will feel really overwhelmed about. Why do I feel so emotionally all over the place at times? You know, why do I get stuck in these really difficult, dark kind of thoughts where I kind of go off into a tangent and don't really know what my own reality is anymore? These are kind of the areas of ADHD and many others that if we start to understand ourselves, then we can go, okay, so what kind of structures, what kind of pillars do I need in my routines that allow me to manage that? So that might not be a diagnosis. It might just be, oh, okay, I now understand why I do these things. I now understand why my brain is leading me in a certain direction all the time. The stress cycle, what that stress cycle looks like and how that's driven by ADHD, the impact my hormones are having on my ADHD. There's so much then to look at and understand that a diagnosis doesn't need to happen, but it does. We do need the right information to inform us of kind of the next steps and maybe where the gaps are in that knowledge.
Yeah, I love everything that you've just said, and I think a lot of people on the call probably resonate a lot with what you've just said too.
Mm,
And thank you for differentiating what it means to different people,
mm,
pushing for that diagnosis or not.
yeah.
What I love about us exploring this in more depth is because I'm so passionate about trying women trying to better understand um, this unexplained diagnosis, particularly when it comes to fertility.
Yeah.
And whilst we can't specifically say something like ADHD is um, a cause for infertility, what we can look at is these characteristics that you mentioned
Mm,
contributing towards hormonal imbalance, internal stresses, immune modulation due to those internal stresses as well,
mm,
that can facilitate this bigger picture of infertility or that
mm,
unexplained infertility diagnosis as well. So it would be great to hear, because I talk about to my patients all day about stress and how much that impacts your hormones, how it can cause irregularities within the cycle. And
yeah.
this is just another facet of that,
Mm,
of how that is manifesting in certain people's bodies that do perhaps identify with that ADHD personality. So I'd love to hear from your perspective how you see that that fits within that role, how it impacts hormones,
mm.
how it therefore can impact your cycle and fertility as a consequence.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a fascinating area to explore, and we're only just starting to scratch the surface of understanding. Well, I mean, so much around women's health, isn't it? We're just so behind all of the research and evidence focusing on women for many reasons that we won't go into right now, but we really need to be progressing further in understanding more the complexities of how all these things fit together. And and at the moment, it is about kind of gathering information. It is about listening to women's experiences, but at the same time, informing ourselves about what we know about the stress cycle and the impact on hormones. And when we look at that through an ADHD lens, what we come to understand is sometimes why we end up in certain stress cycles. Um, so, for example, if you don't mind me sharing a bit of personal experience around my ADHD, is that it wasn't until I got my diagnosis and therefore understanding, which happened because my kids all got their diagnosis, which is a common picture, it was that I understood why it is I'm just pushing so hard all the time to be so busy. I'm so driven. There's always got to be a million and one things going on. And it wasn't until I hit a really serious period of ill health and chronic fatigue and lots of other complications that I was forced, because my body wouldn't let me keep doing a million different things, to really reflect on how dysregulated I felt all the time, how this racing brain and need to have lots of things going on was just how I needed to be. And without my body facilitating that, it was hugely challenging, hugely overwhelming, mental health issues that went alongside that, because I couldn't do what I wanted to do at the rate I needed to do it. And so our bodies are kind of being dragged along, really. The head is ruling the show, the body's being dragged along behind it, not really with a connection. And so one of the things that I really work a lot with women to understand is, when we have ADHD, we spend a lot of time in our head, not very much time attuned to what our body's saying. And our body might be saying, I'm knackered, just stop. But the brain's like, more stimulation, more. And I can go into the details of why that is, if that would be helpful at some point. But essentially, that's what's happening. The brain is seeking more stimulation. It's not interested in if the body is saying enough. So we begin more and more to be running on adrenaline and other stress hormones to keep that and facilitate what the brain is wanting. And what I see in all of my ADHD clients is this stress cycle, this burnout cycle. For some women, that's daily. For some women, that's weekly. And certainly there's a monthly burnout cycle, because what we really recognize is, and this evidence is now showing this, is that our ADHD symptoms are more present and more difficult to manage when our estrogen, getting the ADHD brain in, when our estrogen is lower. So when our estrogen lowers, our ADHD symptoms heightened. So we feel more overwhelmed, we're emotionally dysregulated, we're struggling with the day-to-day life. So it has an impact then on those stress cycles and that kind of potential to burnout, if what we're finding is this, we're not attuned to our bodies. So we're not maybe taking it any slower in that week, or doing anything different with our body or our exercise regime. And a lot of ADHDers have found ways to adapt to this busy brain. So for me, it was overexercising. So I would do crazy amounts of exercise all the time, because I just to get a bit of peace. That was my way of getting a bit of peace. And again, I didn't realize this until I burnt out and got my diagnosis. And now I do my exercise a lot differently. But I know that impacted when I was trying to conceive. I know it did, because it wasn't until I slowed down I did then conceive. Now, I'm not a scientist and I can say 100% categorically it was those two things together, but something shifted when I slowed down, and I had to rein myself in severely, and I did actually see a hypnotherapist with that, even though I didn't understand it was ADHD. Is to slow down is really hard. You know, there's the classic description of an ADHD brain. It's like having a Ferrari for a brain with bicycle brakes. The brakes are like, no, not going to stop. And even now, you know, I know all this stuff. I talk and I research and I support ADHD clients day in, day out. And yet I am still running ahead of myself and have to put visible cues around me that says, you're going to stop now. And people around me reminding me, you need to stop now. Because it's for me, it's like a steam train. It's like a steam train. It just never stops. And that drive can be amazing. You can achieve lots of things, but sometimes there's a cost.
I see that a lot with people that are so actively pushing for this one thing that they're so focused on. But that in itself can facilitate a stress. And that need and that drive and that desire can be so all-consuming, that that in itself, so that even the trying to conceive becomes so much of a trying that it creates that stress. And as I said, I see that an awful lot. I liken it to spending using your credit card when you actually have nothing in the bank, because it's that. And in Chinese medicine, we consider it this kind of yang energy, that fire energy, burning through that yin energy. That's that grounding and cooling energy that is naturally feminine, naturally estrogenic if you're a hormone reflecting.
Mm.
So yeah, we can see it and how that plays out in all aspects of life. Um, the There's an interesting theme that we're seeing here as well with those types of personalities, is this
Mm.
kind of dopamine fix that I think that a lot of ADHD people crave.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you've got any reflections or thoughts on again how much that can impact your cycle or day to day or health in general,
Mm.
or
I
choices
think
that you make, for example.
yeah, exactly. It's leading the need for more dopamine, and the reason for that is because ADHD is a dopamine dysregulation where our brain is not it's either not producing or not stabilizing and connecting the dopamine in the right way. So we're constantly seeking more of it in order for our brains to operate in the way that we need them to, in order to focus and hold attention. So we're driven by this very need for more stimulation, and more dopamine. And sometimes that leads us down sometimes maladaptive paths of behavior that, through no fault of our own, have just become our way of dealing with it, our way of trying to manage what the way our brain is and experiences the world. And for some people, that can be, like the high intensity um, workouts, or it can be reaching that high achieving job goal. For some, it can be more around alcohol or recreational drugs. There's lots, or food, for example, as well. I see a lot of ADHDs, and there's a lot written about both restrictive eating and binge eating and ADHD. Again, we get it. For some people, it's the restriction gives them a dopamine hit, and the science around that. For some people, it's consuming lots of those foods that give the dopamine hit. But when we understand what's driving the show is the need for more dopamine and why the brain is needing that, then we can start to create more of an understanding of why, bring in some tools that bring more conscious awareness to that, so that then we can make some different choices with how we receive that stimulation and the different layers of it. That when we think that we need more of a certain type, it might actually be the other kind of energy that we need, the more restorative, the more um, the more regulating pursuits that allow us to ground a bit more, to anchor a bit more. And that can be really difficult, but it's not impossible for an ADHD to find that. It's finding the right tool for them. There is no one thing that helps ADHD. There are lots of layers of things, just
Yeah.
like there's not one thing to enable being a well-rounded human being. There's lots of different things. And with ADHD, there's a similar complexity, but when we have more information as to which direction to maybe take that awareness and choices, then we start to find life just feeling a bit more balanced, rather than this kind of peak and trough of energies and moods and behaviors. It's just a bit more. Yes, there's always going to be an up and down, there always will be, but let's just make that a little bit more of a curve rather than a sharp peak either way.
It sounds like obviously different things are going to work for different people. It sounds like working with your cycle and your
Mm.
body's own innate needs throughout your cycle,
Yeah.
and therefore then the choices you make through lifestyle, diet, behavior, even sexual desire, and
Mm.
embracing what it is that you actually need and checking in with yourself might just then, at those different phases of your cycle, might just be more regulating in
Mm.
some ways, rather than just trying to constantly push through
Yeah.
what your body's actually trying to tell you. I know
Mm.
from my perspective, again, whilst being undiagnosed, but definitely fitting the bill in more ways than one, I've found that by embracing my quality, because I like to consider them as qualities at different times of my cycle, and
Mm.
then checking in with myself that actually they're my superpowers at those particular times.
Yeah.
And then making sure that I'm checking in and reining myself in at other times in my cycle is really
Mm.
beneficial, because that way at least I know that I
Yeah.
can be like, well, I'm in my luteal phase, I'm premenstrual, I know I want to be doing all of these amazing things and, you know, running marathons and being, you know, doing 1,000 different things. But I know that I can sit back into that more restorative phase, incorporate more restorative, regulating things into my life, because I know that I can pick it up again when my hormones and my energy is more abundant in that follicular phase. So yeah, I feel like working with your cycle could be a really beneficial way of working with that. I don't know if that's been your experience with your clients,
Yeah,
but
no, absolutely. I mean, it's only been something that I've been doing more of the last few months, but it's been so many interesting conversations. I mean, first of all, I'm sure you find this a lot with your work, Emily, is that a lot of women don't really understand their cycles and when to actually slow down and be more restorative, when actually the body is going to give us more resources to be able to take on more challenges. But rather than fighting against our hormones, yeah, let's work with them. Let's understand how they can enhance our lifestyle and the things that we choose to do around those times, and to acknowledge that if there is, there was one particular client that I worked with, and she would, when she kind of got this information about herself, really brought it into so many different levels. Because that's the other thing, is that if an ADHD gets hold of something that we're interested in, we're going to be really hyper focusing on that. So finding those ways, those interests around hormones, and finding your way into, okay, so how can I find an interest in this, so that then your brain's more likely to engage with it and want to track or understand. This particular client I'm thinking of just made really, even shifts around what she was eating around those times, how she was exercising around those times. It made a huge difference to what had been a real dysregulated cycle. She was practically not having, there was no monthly cycle. And then she changed and adapted to how she was doing those things. The cycle came back into a regular rhythm again. And she would start to notice, right, I'm feeling really, really emotionally all over the place this week. And for an ADHD person, woman, that's going to be even more dysregulated at that time. It's like another layering of difficulty and challenge that we have at that time, just before our period. But when we know that, there can just be some more compassion, more understanding for ourselves, rather than what society says, which is you just push on through, you just keep working harder and doing more, and all that rubbish all over the bloody Always adverts. We're going to be flying out of airplanes when we have period, and all that. Like, if we start to tune into what the body is saying, yeah, and really that's an essence of ADHD as well, is that we do need to tune in more, and also have those pillars of structure. I think that's the other thing that I really see, and I've written about a lot, as well as me kind of seeing that with clients and myself, is that we need the structure within our week, so that we've got the headspace to even think this stuff through. Because by nature of ADHD, there's just so much noise in there, to then go, oh, maybe we should consider our hormone cycle. It's like, oh, what? I've got to think about that as well. It's too much. However, if we start to look at, either with support with somebody that understands, or just recognizing yourself, okay, what are my structures? What enables me to be able to eat regularly, to have a good sleep hygiene, that enables me to check in with myself and have the occasional pause. And I do mean pause, because I know if I say to ADHD, it's, why don't you take a break? It's like, no, I can't do that. But maybe just a pause. That those pillars then allow for a bit more ability to quieten things down a little bit, or to then allow a bit of space to go, right, let me learn about some of these things then. Particularly if we think about what's happening around fertility, is, like you were saying earlier, that can become a hyper focus, and all the energy is going into that, but not looking the other way of, so how am I taking care of myself around this? Because this is taking a lot of emotional energy, and emotional energy is extremely draining, with a brain that's already struggling to manage so many different factors.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, in what you were just saying, support cropped up an awful lot. And so I feel like embracing this aspect of yourself is great, But that's only part of the journey, and almost at that point, when you start feeling comfortable and confident with who you are and embracing that, having that conversation with your partners, your family, your support network, particularly obviously when going through the fertility journey, because it's such an uncertain time. And a time that often feels completely out of control and completely overwhelming and all consuming. Reaching out to these people and explaining actually how it is that you're feeling, and what it is that you need, and need from yourself and need from them, could be really, really beneficial in creating those structures and those pillars and that support for yourself, moving forward throughout that journey as well. And I know, Jane, that you've spoken before about how much this type of behavior or this type of diagnosis as well can impact your support network and your relationships. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you've seen that unfold, and how that can impact, again, couples when they're trying to conceive.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think there's a lot to unpick around that side of accessing support, being able to communicate how you best need to receive that support, the impact that it has on the relationship, because there's still so much to understand between a couple where ADHD is present, and it may not be the female, it may be the male, or it may be same-sex couples. There's whatever's happening there. If ADHD is present and it's not being diagnosed or understood, then quite often there's a lot of blame that happens around certain behaviours, certain triggers and responses, and how quickly those responses come about. Because of course, if it very much emotional dysregulation is a picture of ADHD, so, and with that layer of sensitivity around trying to conceive as well, then that emotional regulation is going to be even harder. So it can be helpful to start from a place of, okay, what are my needs? And depending where you are at on that journey, have you ever spoken out loud to anybody about, I think this might be happening for me, you know, I think there might be some elements of ADHD that I'm experiencing, that I'm struggling with, so that it takes the blame out of those behaviours. There becomes a neutral space in which to have those conversations. Sorry, my ADHD is really distracted by how loud the rain is. I'm really trying to focus on the rain. Just like,
It's crazy, isn't it?
it's really bonkers.
Torrential.
Yeah. So I'll come back on track. Yeah, to find that neutral space so that you can have conversations with your partner about, I am really struggling in this way. And something that we've not really touched on yet in this conversation, but is hugely important to acknowledge is masking, is that we mask even in our relationships. And that's a huge thing to overcome. If we've always been a certain way in relationships, if maybe we've been, I don't know, the people pleaser, or the one that looks after the other, or the one that is all over the place but doesn't really know how to explain what's really going on behind that, then it can be difficult to take that mask off and go, actually, I feel incredibly vulnerable, but I don't know how to tell you that. You know, I'm really scared about this journey that we're on. I fixate about it constantly. I can't think about anything else, but I don't know how to tell you that. Being able to have those really vulnerable conversations as a couple, I think, is really hard, because there's all this external kind of face that we put on, whatever that is. And for some couples, maybe that's not an issue. Maybe they can find that neutral space easily and enable that communication, which is amazing if they can do that. But I'm acknowledging that that's not easy, because particularly if there's not been an ADHD understanding as that woman has grown up, and has grown up with these certain ways of coping and presenting, it can be a hard bridge to cross from a mask that's been there that says, this is me, I've got it all together, I'm doing really fine, when behind it's the total opposite.
That's really interesting. I never have heard the term masking, but I can see how it plays out. So it's really interesting to know that that's an actual thing. How would you, in that instance, so I think we're all guilty of it, perhaps people, you know, that fit that ADHD bill more so than others. How would you suggest navigating that type of, you know, like feeling comfortable and confident to remove that mask? How would you suggest, or what would that kind of look like, do you think?
I think it's different for each person, but I think the first part of that is speaking to somebody, just somebody that you feel that you can trust. And sometimes that's going to be a friend or partner. Sometimes that's somebody that doesn't know you. Maybe that is somebody that specializes in ADHD. And I would say, just as a caveat, is that if you go to a therapist or counselor, just make sure that they do have that specialist knowledge, because without it, you can end up down another route that ends up compounding something. You think, oh no, there is something wrong with me. But whoever it is, you just start to open up those conversations so that you can hear yourself saying them out loud. Because masking is something that is so internal, or rather, masking enforces it kind of being locked in, that it's finding those gentle ways of letting that out. For some people, it could be journaling and reading that and understanding it and coming back to it and going, okay, there's a lot going on here for me. Let me understand it a bit more. How can I communicate? What of this would I like to communicate to my partner, so that they can understand me in this way? And maybe if it is speaking out loud to somebody that you trust, you're starting to go, I just need to share a bit about what's really going on and how I really experience these things, without it being led, then felt kind of, feels so exposing when you unmask.
Yeah, a
And
real
I'm speaking,
vulnerability.
yeah, sorry.
A real vulnerability, I feel.
Absolutely, a huge vulnerability that then feels almost like afterwards, like he gets this, Brené Brown talks about a vulnerability hangover, but afterwards when you shared something, you just carry this kind of unrest, this unsettled feeling that's just like, I let something out and I can't take it back in. It's like it's out there now. I just want to bring it all back in and just go, no, I'm really, really fine. But when you do that in a safe space enough times, you start to go, okay, this actually is who I am, and it's okay. It's okay that I haven't got my shit together. It's okay that actually my emotions are all over the place. In fact, I don't even know what my emotions are. I can't even connect with them. They're so all over the place. That be okay, and that we learn to accept those parts of ourselves. The more you do it, the more comfortable you can become with it. And it's just like gentle steps, though. Everybody needs to do that at their own pace. But gently we start to hear ourselves and understand ourselves with less masking going on. You know, because people mask at work, they mask socially. It's finding those safe spaces where you can go, do you know what? This is who I am. This is who I am. Yes, I'm always late. Yes, you know, I've got my pants inside out, and I just realised that when I went to the toilet. Yes, I forgot my best friend's birthday, and all those things that we carry around ourselves that just make us go, oh God, I'm such a bad person. It's okay. It's okay, because it's not coming from a place of, oh, I'm deliberately going to do all these things. It's just the brain is operating at such in chaotic manner. It's hard to always have it together. And I think it's really difficult, particularly as women, to go, do you know what? I'm a bit messy. I'm a bit messy. I'm all over the place as a human being. Because we're taught from a young age to be quiet, to be presentable, to be pleasant, and all those things. And a lot of ADHD women that I speak to will say at some point, I feel as I've been made to feel in some way, and that's not necessarily by one person. Maybe it's society, maybe it's partners, maybe it's certain friends, as though I'm a bit intense, like I'm too much in some way. I hear that so often from women. And there's this kind of feeling like, oh, been a bit much there, haven't I? Need to rein it in a bit. And so there's a lot of that social anxiety that goes around. You know, I know that I can be really loud, or sometimes it's like I'm being really quiet. I don't want to talk because I'm exhausted from socializing all day at work, and I've got nothing left. And so we still feel the need to put this face on. Oh no, but I need to still present that I'm okay, and I can laugh and joke in the same way as you. There's a real complexity to masking. I could probably talk about that for a whole hour in itself.
Yeah,
But
I
this
feel
yeah.
Sorry, I feel like you've touched on such a huge topic around around not just ADHD, but women's behavior, social acceptability, femininity, feminism. It's a huge, huge thing where women are and continue to be, despite everything, um, told to contain themselves,
Yeah.
told to behave in a certain way or do certain things, and not be too successful, and not be too loud, or but not be too quiet, and
Mm, yeah.
you know, bring something to the table but don't overdo it. You know, we as women are so, I feel like as a consequence of all of this, historically, that we have throughout generations been burdened with, have had to then create these masks to
Mm,
display ourselves in ways that have become socially acceptable, um, to whoever it is that we're speaking to. I think that's changing. And again, people like yourself, Jane, just opening up a dialogue and around our different behaviors and our capacity to start being able to embrace them, but embrace them in a way that feels healthy and congruent with ourselves,
mm.
is really, really important, and really, really necessary. And I hope that with time, that level of support, that level of awareness, will be able to burn the masks and just sit into being who we truly are, like men have for centuries. And yeah, maybe not sit with labels even, but just be like, yep, this is me. So
Exactly. Yeah, that we're all different, and to embrace those differences. That some people like order, for some people, actually, that's really hard to achieve, and that's okay. And to also find those um, pursuits, those activities that allow us to move into that intensity in a way that feels more comfortable. You know, it wasn't really until I did start my own business that I recognized I actually found the structure of being in an office really oppressive. But I didn't know that until I'd moved into a different space and could just, you know, if I want to stand up and dance, I'll stand up and dance in the middle of my therapy room, not when there's a client present, but you know what I mean? Just to be able to do what I need to do in the middle of the day, or um, that flexibility around moving with our impulses, but in a way that feels, you know, like in a helpful way, not in a, I don't know, the ways that sometimes it comes out in other structures that's less helpful to ourselves. Um, one of the real pillars that I find is so important for us to recognize is we need an outlet. We need outlets as an ADHD, and we need outlets that allow us to express and that allow us to create and allow us to connect. So crucial, because we want to connect. And sometimes it might be we really want to connect, and we reach out to that person, and then when it comes to it, like, I'm just shattered, I can't do it, I've got nothing my social battery means that I can actually meet up with that person. But when you're on the phone to them earlier, it's like, yeah, let's do this thing, and then it comes to it and you're like, I can't. And so there needs the flexibility to say, do you know what, I really wanted to see you, but I'm just not be, you know, I just really need to just go to bed or have a bath or whatever, and that be okay. But there is this need to be able to connect, but using the energy that we've got to be able to connect in the right way that feels able to. Maybe it's, oh, but I might text you later, and maybe I'll send a voice note and say, I'm really sorry, can we just pick this up tomorrow or later next week? But still feeling that you can connect, not rather than, actually, I need to go and put my mask on and just be that person tonight. So connect in the ways that work for us. Find that creative expression that makes you go, yes, I really want to do that. And I'm not talking necessarily, you know, creatively sitting down and drawing a picture. I mean, whatever it is that makes you go, yeah, I want to explore that in that way, whether it's how you do your work creatively, whether it's how you absorb information, and then how you want to talk about that to other people in a really in-depth way. Or maybe it is something artistic. Maybe it's dance. You know, for me, it's dance. I have to go and dance. That's how I express myself. And if I don't, I feel I'm not okay. But we need to find those outlets and allow more of them. create more of them and explore what they are, because there's a really important discovery within the ADHD brain around how we use our imagination, how we can get lost down a path if we're not using that imagination in a productive way. So there's a part of the brain called the default mode network that's responsible for our imagination. And what we now understand is that there's a glitch between the default mode network and the task focused network of our brain, and it's constantly kind of glitching from one to the other. It's like we're focusing on something. Oh no, now I'm just wondering about that thing. What was it? I was supposed to be doing this thing. Oh, now I'm just wondering, I've got an idea about. And the reason that we do that is because the two parts of the brain are actually operating at the same time. And when we begin to understand that, not only can we build in structures and pillars that allow us to be able to focus more easily and remove distractions so that that task positive part of the network can focus more easily, but also recognize that when we get lost in this imaginative part of the brain, it can become a kind of devil and angel situation. Is that if we don't utilize it and harness it and express it and redirect it, then we end up down these quite dark thinking. We can kind of get stuck in this really intensely dark place where we're ruminating and lots of what if scenarios are happening. And those what if scenarios aren't just a thought, they're a whole picture of what could happen. And if we put the lens of fertility within this, that can become huge, absolutely huge. And we become stuck in it, like, don't even know what my own reality is anymore. And I found that hugely helpful to understand.
I feel like those pictures that you were mentioning that we create, those visionary, imaginative pictures, in particular when it comes to fertility, can be not just all consuming, but so vivid. It's like they take on a life of their own. And, you know, in a conscious and subconscious way, you know, that's when you start to get sleep dysfunction and vivid dreams, you know, sleepwalking, talking, when though that visionary, imaginative picture that we're living starts to infiltrate then every aspect and every moment of our lives, even during sleep state, which can be really toxic, you know, if not harnessed. And I feel like the behaviors, obviously, that you just mentioned, again, I see in a lot of my patients where that type of, sorry, my dog, she's, talk about ADHD, she's definitely got it. Is where, you know, that wanting and needing to do everything that can then become very overwhelming. And that's when those dark thoughts can be triggered. So, for example, tracking ovulation, doing BBT, doing OPKs, checking cervical mucus, checking cervix position, you know, is it the right time? Is it not? I've been doing it. Can all of those, trying to do everything, but then being stuck and feeling like you're doing nothing, or never feeling like as well you do enough, can be really destructive. And so it's useful to pick up on those behaviors and know that there are ways and means of harnessing that to make it feel less overwhelming, more productive, create more clarity over that situation, so that, you know, you're not trying to do everything all at once. I'd love to know any hint, and I'm sure everyone else would, any hints or tips that you have that can work on that, regulating your thought process, so that, you know, where you want to do everything, helping to rein it in so that there's some clear structures in place, so you're not completely overwhelming yourself all of the time. I wonder if you have thoughts anyway.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things to consider. There's thinking about those structures and routines that allow for some regular check-in points. I talk a lot with clients about those mini check-ins, and that can just be 20-30 seconds of using the breath to just pause. Okay, allow the breath to connect the mind and the body. How am I doing? What's going on? Am I avoiding emotion? Am I stuck down a rabbit hole of thinking? You know, have I literally been thinking all morning about something to do with trying to conceive, or where I'm at in my cycle, or what I need to be? You know, have I been doing that for a number of hours or a really long period of time, and actually I'm getting stuck there, so that we can pause, take the breath, and then notice, just notice, yeah, I am actually down that pathway again, aren't I? Okay. Then proceed with that information of, yeah, I got stuck down this pathway. So there can be a number of ways of looking at that, is then to redirect that attention consciously by doing something that needs to be intense enough that it snaps the brain out of that. Because again, if you think about ADHD is seeking more intensity and stimulation. Now, even the intensity of the difficulty of those thoughts is stimulating enough to keep us there. And it's a really important thing to understand about ADHD, is that often we can get stuck in fights. You know, I mean, talking verbal fights at motor school, but verbal fights with people, but they're so intensely stimulating. It's like we're driven to more of that. Driven to be thinking, yeah, this is really hard for me, and this is never going to happen, and all those kind of thoughts that go around trying to conceive. Recognizing that in itself is an intensity that's stimulating the brain. So we need to redirect that, but it needs to be something else that is stimulating in a different way. So that could be playing really loud music, just one loud track, put it on really loud to snap into something different. It can be putting your hands under cold water, you know, something physical that redirects the brain to a different state. It can be getting yourself out for movement, change the environment. Right, I've been doing this for a long time. You might not feel like you want to go for a walk, but just take yourself out anyway. Layer it with something else, like listening to something in your earphones or music, a podcast of something not fertility related, that's going to shift your mind into a different place. Connect with somebody, pick up the phone and just, you know, say hi to someone, or find your thing that redirects that attention and that focus, because without it, we're just going to stay on that path, and it's probably not going to get any better until we do redirect. And then the whole shame cycle starts of what kind of behaviors and emotions that follow on from it. So a really important part of that is the check-ins, because we don't know we've gone down that path unless we have something that makes us go, oh, I've been doing that again. I've been doing it for several hours, and actually I haven't done anything. I've just been stuck in this thought loop and feeling really bad about it. And it's been all consuming, and it's become a hyper focus. And it takes practice to find those check-ins. I always say to clients, you know, habit stack it with something else, whether it be every time you go to the toilet, or every time you wash your hands, or every time you pick up your phone. I mean, that might be a bit much, because that may be a million times a day, but something that you regularly do, habit stack a check-in. So I quite like the analogy, the mindfulness analogy of using the word stop. I talk about this in my webinars and the talk that I'm doing later in April. I'm going to really hammer this point home, is that using the word stop can be a great check-in. S stands for stop itself, take that pause. T is taking a breath, literally just taking a breath and allowing the breath to connect what's happening. And the O is to observe. So what is going on? What am I noticing about myself? And then using that information for the P of that, which is to proceed. So you're then proceeding with more information about yourself. And everything that we do, and the more times you do that, even though we can't change ADHD brain, we can still, within our own neuroplasticity, build another connection of regular check-ins. So using that stop is quite a useful, just a little pocket tool to take away of
I
something.
love that. That is such a nice analogy. And yeah, I love it. It can be applied so often throughout the day, and it's so simple. And what I love that it ends with proceed. So obviously ADHD people need to take action in some way. And so that it's almost like a permission to proceed, permission to take action and move forward, but hopefully in a more regulated way after having done the ST and O part. That's fantastic. Love that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't take credit for it. It was in a mindfulness book with ADHD, but please
Yeah.
share it as much as you
I
want.
feel
Yeah.
like you can take it. It's the first time I've heard it. I mean, I think that we could talk all night. There's so many areas that I feel like we could kind of expand on, things like ADHD, fertility and sex, relationships, and hormones, as we mentioned. There's so many facets to this that could be really insightful and game-changing for a lot of people. So I really appreciate you taking this time to just dip our toe into that world and explore this in more detail. And as you said, just with curiosity to start piecing together and reflecting on doing some self-reflection on ourselves and our partners throughout this journey. So thank you for that. I wonder, because I'm just mindful that we're getting to that hour point, I wonder if anyone's got any questions. By all means, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If not, you can either like message Jane directly on Instagram, or drop us an email and we'll forward that on to Jane as well. Where did the chat thing go? Did you have anything you wanted to add, Jane?
I think just briefly something that you said that I think may be worth exploring at another point in the future is, or even just to acknowledge some of the things that we haven't had time to touch on, but I really want to validate in case anybody's experiencing these issues, is understanding the distractible mind within intimacy. It's something that isn't talked about enough because it is to do with intimacy. So it's like, oh, it's hard to talk about, but it needs to be named. That how we access that intimate place for ourselves and the ability to be intimate with an ADHD brain brings about challenges, and the sensory experience. So there's a lot of sensitivities around our senses that can also get in the way of being intimate on lots of different levels. So I just wanted to put that out there because I know we've not had a chance to discuss it, but it is something for people to be aware of.
It's huge, and I'd really love to do another talk on it, so that we can explore it in more detail. Because I feel like, again, it's such a valuable topic, and but such a large topic as well. So I'd love to spend some time doing that. I've sent everyone a link to Jane's email, Insta in the chat. So by all means, feel free to contact her directly. And just to, so we know, that's obviously how you can contact her. But Jane, you've got a number of other things coming up, like webinars and talks and stuff that people can tap into your knowledge and insight in a little more detail if this is something you wanted to explore more. So I don't know if you've got the time just to briefly relay what you're doing in the near future.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you do follow me on Instagram, I'll always let you know about webinars that I do regularly. And if you are based in South Yorkshire, then I'm doing a big ADHD event on the 30th of April at the Lead Mill. I'm unmasking ADHD. I'm going to stand on the stage. I'm going to say what I've been talking about tonight, but in huge detail and depth, and have an opportunity to experience some of the mindfulness tools firsthand. So if anybody would like to join us there, then head along to either on my website or the Lead Mill, and you can get tickets from there. So yes, there's always things that I'm wanting to share. You can find me in lots of different places, so look out on my socials for that.
Amazing, thank you for that. And I've just noticed that Alice has raised her hand, so I've asked you to unmute yourself if you'd like to.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, because it's easier than typing. I'm on an iPad and it's just a bit fiddly. I had a question just generally when it comes to sort of ADHD and fertility. Obviously, Kimberly, yourself with Life in Lemons, you offer sort of acupuncture and dietary advice and things. And Jane, I had a little look at your website, and I'm going to have a closer look later about hypnotherapy. I'm just wondering, in terms of sort of alternate therapies, so not medication that psychiatrists deal with, if there are people going through ADHD and sort of trying to improve their fertility, is there any other sort of alternative things that you find people tend to find helpful at all?
Yeah, in terms of, it's a good question, because I think, again, it's about exploring things individually. So for some people, it's exploring that kind of, there's different stimulants that that you find, it's finding that balance really of finding something that stimulates the brain, enables that focus and to feel more regulated, but not into that feeling wired or just, everything happening at a million miles an hour. So maybe experimenting with, everybody has different abilities with, so for some ADHDers, caffeine doesn't even touch the sides, don't even feel it. Some people can drink caffeine before they go to sleep and actually regulates them. There's a whole thing around caffeine and ADHD that needs to be understood. But playing around with your kind of stimulants, whether that be how exercise fits within and enables more of that focus and the dopamine release, how the diet fits in and that you notice. So I really noticed that if I eat certain foods, I just can't concentrate afterwards. Like I get such brain fog, and anything that's going to either bring a high level of stimulation and then a crash afterwards, just bringing curiosity to those and just wondering and kind of tracking a bit of, when I do that, or when I eat that, or when I drink that, or if I go all day and I don't have a break and try and push through, actually, am I just no use at the end of the day? All of these things are things to play about with and recognize that they all play a part. The dopamine system is really delicate, and we do need to bring a kind of sensitive approach to it. And we'll all have different ways that we can. There are certain writings around supplements. Feel free to kind of look into those. I don't have any exactly that I could promote at this point, because I wouldn't want to without being really clear about what they are. Some nutritionists work and specialize in ADHD, so that's something to maybe explore as well. And almost creating I like to talk to clients about creating this kind of dopamine, almost like a menu of sorts, almost like you kind of can delve into, right, I need a real high level of dopamine hit now because I feel like I really need that. Or what's just going to give me a bit more of a subtle one that, maybe that's just, I'm going to play some loud music that I really love, or I'm going to watch my favorite TV program. So almost recognizing those different activities and pursuits and how they either stimulate on what level you need it at, can be really helpful to just get to know yourself around those things.
Yeah. I think just to add to that as well, because you mentioned nutritional therapy, just so you know, the gut-brain connection is very real, and there is some information around that and neurodiversity around how much of an impact the gut microbiome has on how that presents and how, from a mental health perspective, we're feeling, and again from a neurodiversity perspective, how things evolve and develop as a consequence. And so working with, again, we come back to regulation, working with diet in that respect can be really beneficial, because creating regulation by the things that we put into our body, reducing that internal stress, reducing these incredible peaks and troughs in things like blood sugar, stress that's going to contribute towards cortisol dysregulation, again, can be, or, not leaning on things like sugar, that's going to have that dopamine kick as well, is going to have a real impact on how you feel and how you feel in control of this particular presentation of yourself, and these particular characteristics of yourself. So leaning on a nutritional therapist could be really beneficial, but as Jane said, maybe speaking directly to a specialist that deals with nutrition and neurodiversity would be really, really great, because they'd be able to work with you directly on that kind of gut-brain axis. There are a number of supplements out there that can work with that. So specifically looking at probiotics, probiotics that can help support that microbiome. And there's, again, lots of evidence, lots of research in and around that, but only best to be done under the guidance of a nutritional therapist that would be able to support you with that, because again, it's complex. I never think that anyone should take a supplement without knowing that that's exactly what they need to be taking, which is why we advocate for testing, to make sure that it's the right fix for you as well. So that's something I would say. And also, again, whilst I wouldn't be able to recommend a specific practitioner of sorts, everyone's so different with what it is that helps to regulate them. And so, for example, obviously I use electroacupuncture to work on stimulating certain parts of the brain, and using specific frequencies to dial up and dial down certain parts of our body and our brain and how our brain's firing. So again, that can be really beneficial. But for other people, something as simple as reflexology could be really regulating for them. Again, maybe weaving in those different types of practices at the different phases of your cycle that you feel like you really want and need them, could be really beneficial. But I don't think that, particularly not at the moment anyway. I think Jane kind of more pioneers this as a specialism. There's no one particular treatment or therapy that I would necessarily recommend for this as a general rule, because everyone's so different. So it's finding what works for you. I just wanted to add that, if that helps. I don't know. Grand. Does anyone else have any questions before we kind of go sign off? Nope. Wonderful. Well, you've got Jane's Instagram. We're going to be sending out a recording of this anyway. So if you want to listen to it again at a later stage, or you have any burning questions at a later date, you know where we are. And we'll always do what we can to help in any way, shape, or form. Definitely go along to Jane's Seed Talk at the Lead Mill. It's going to be amazing. And catch all the free content that she does and gets out there, because again, this was just an hour, but you've got a whole host of information that can be really insightful if you want to learn more about yourself and ADHD diagnosis.
Thank you for the time, Kimberly, and thank you for everybody that's attended this evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Jane.
Okay,
and we'll try and get in the diaries some other time to talk about all the other things. God, thanks.
Great.
Hope you have a lovely evening, everyone.
Yeah, you too.
Bye now.
Good evening. Good night.